All right, let's be honest. The American plan to break Canada's economy didn't just fail, it backfired.
While Washington waited for us to beg for mercy, Canada quietly rewrote the rules of the game.
And now, while we're building a sovereign future, the people Trump promised to save are the ones actually paying the price.
So we need to talk honestly about what's happening right now, because the way this story is being told, especially out of the United States, is completely backwards.
Yep, we keep hearing that Canada is the one under pressure, that we're the ones scrambling, that we're the ones who got caught flat-footed.
And that might sound convincing until you actually look at what's happening. People keep treating this like a short-term trade dispute when what we're really watching is the fallout from a much bigger miscalculation.
Because once you look at the actual numbers and the consequences, it becomes pretty obvious who miscalculated here. This didn't flip in a week, and it didn't start with one tariff announcement. This has been building for months, and honestly, even years, based on assumptions that no longer hold.
And frankly, the Americans are the ones suffering for it. And I don't mean the politicians in Washington. I mean the people who were promised that this trade war would save them.
So today, we're going to break down exactly how Canada survived the squeeze, how we pivoted away from the US, and why the win Trump promised his supporters has turned into a nightmare for the American working class.
And to understand this, we have to look at the assumption that started it all. For decades, North America ran on a very simple rule. If the United States pushed hard enough, Canada would absorb it. We would adjust quietly, smooth things over, and keep the relationship stable, no matter what the cost to us.
And to be fair, Canada did that for a long time. We structured our economy around reliable access to the US market. We priced our resources competitively, and we designed supply chains that made American industries more efficient.
That was the deal. Access to the market came with pressure, and Canada paid for that access quietly, with discounted resources, with supply chains built around American convenience, with energy flowing south at prices that made U.S. industries very comfortable.
Which is why the story Donald Trump sold to his supporters was so upside down. He told them Canada was freeloading, when in reality, the U.S. had been benefiting from Canadian oil, Canadian lumber, and Canadian manufacturing inputs at a very favorable terms for decades.
And that myth mattered, because once it took hold, it turned into policy. Tariffs weren't just about economics anymore. They were about punishment and dominance.
And the expectation behind those tariffs was clear. Canada would panic, Canada would scramble, and Canada would come back asking for relief.
But instead of reacting emotionally, Canada did something much more effective. We slowed everything down and started planning for a future where the U.S. could no longer be treated as a guaranteed partner.
Trump thought Canada would fold like a lawn chair, but instead, we united and fought back, quietly, economically, and intellectually. We didn't fall for the MAGA politics to vote in a mini-Trump wanting nothing but division and chaos. We voted in an economist, calm, collected Kearney. And he made the moves that Canada hasn't seen in decades.
So let's talk about the first move. The U.S. tried to trap Canada by turning the border into a pressure point. Tariffs weren't just economics anymore. They were leverage.
The thinking by Trump was, close the door, make it painful, and Canada will come knocking.
But Canada didn't knock. Canada built another door. And instead of begging for access, Canada did something smarter. We started selling elsewhere.
We're a G7 country with a stash of resources that makes the entire world salivate with envy. We used our status, our reputation, and our stability to find new partners. Europe, Asia, Mexico, the new partners who weren't threatening us every single month.
One of the first places this showed up was energy, because energy is where the leverage was supposed to be the strongest.
Right. For decades, Newfoundland and Labrador sent the vast majority of its oil south to the United States because the infrastructure, the contracts, and the pricing all pointed that way.
But once tariff and trade threats became routine, Canadian producers didn't wait around to see how bad it might get, so they started shifting exports toward Europe.
And this wasn't a symbolic move either. More than half of that oil was redirected across the Atlantic. That requires long-term contracts. commitments, and infrastructure changes.
Which means it's not something you can reverse on a whim. The U.S. didn't just lose leverage in theory, they lost reliable access in practice. And Europe, they gained a stable supplier.
And at the same time, Canada gained something more important than leverage. We gained options, and that's when the bullying stopped working.
That same pattern played out with investment, and this is where Washington really misread the situation.
Yeah, the idea was that uncertainty would scare capital away from Canada. Investors would hesitate, projects would stall, and pressure would build internally.
Instead, investors looked at the chaos coming out of Washington and made a very rational decision. They moved their money to where they could actually plan for the future.
Canada chose a successful business person, someone who understands how markets react to uncertainty, how capital flows work, and why predictability matters more than all that bluster.
Meanwhile, the United States doubled down on a leader who built his brand on bravado, bankruptcies, and constant bailouts from Russian money to keep his fragile empire that he inherited afloat. That contrast became impossible for investors to ignore.
But what's important to say here is that Canada didn't cut ties with the U.S. because that would have been reckless. Instead, we built flexibility into the system. One set of supply chains stayed connected to the U.S., but another set expanded outward towards Europe, Asia, and South America. And that flexibility changed the balance of power.
Washington thought Canada was stuck. It turned out we were just overly reliant.
And then the consequences started showing up where the tariffs were actually landing, inside the U.S.
Because tariffs don't hurt abstract economies. They hurt companies that import parts and materials. And those companies, they employ real people.
Manufacturing in the U.S. contracted for 9 straight months leading into late 2025, which is the longest stretch since the financial crisis of 2008.
And it wasn't high-income coastal regions taking the hit. It was manufacturing, heavy red states that were promised revival. The red states were hit the hardest.
Instead of the so-called liberal elites being squeezed, factories closed, jobs disappeared, and food bank lines got longer. At the same time, major American corporations started pushing back. Costco suing the U.S. government over tariff refunds wasn't political theater. It was a signal that the policy was breaking down. When one of the largest retailers in the country takes legal action, that means the policy has failed.
And that's the part that rarely gets talked about. Trump supporters were sold the idea that this would hurt Canada and their enemies from within.
Instead, they're lining up for assistance and being told to blame Biden, who actually left office with a strong economy after cleaning up Trump's original mess. They're told to blame Obama, who hasn't even been in office for more than a decade, or blame Hollywood, blame Canada. Just don't blame the guy doing all the damage.
Now, we do need to pause here for 1 second, Dave, because I want to be very careful not to sound like arrogant Canadians. We've painted a picture of Canada fighting back, but we need to be honest about the cost.
Yes, we do. Canada isn't living in some kind of economic paradise right now. We are not out of the woods.
Not even close. Prices in Canada are still high. And transitioning an entire economy away from your biggest trading partner is expensive and it's painful.
There are sectors in Canada that are hurting. There are businesses that relied on the U.S. that haven't found new buyers yet. This wasn't a free victory.
We're going to be dealing with the fallout of this for years. The challenge ahead is massive, and we have to maintain these new relationships. We have to keep our productivity up, and we have to justify that foreign investment every single day to keep Canadians happy.
But here's the difference. The pain we are feeling now is the pain of restructuring. It's the pain of becoming independent.
Versus the pain of what the U.S. is feeling, which is pain of self-inflicted chaos.
Yep, we have successfully laid the groundwork. We have secured our sovereignty. We have proven to ourselves and to the world that we are not a vassal state.
And that meeting last month at the World Cup, when Carney walked into the room, he didn't walk in asking for a favor.
No, he walked in representing a country that had adapted, a country that had options.
Listen, Canada didn't pick this fight, but we finished the adjustment.
And honestly, the U.S. did us a favor. They forced us to do what we should have done 20 years ago. They forced us to stand on our own 2 feet.
So no, we are not out of the woods, but we are walking our own path right now.
and it's a path that's worth walking. So that'll do it for today. Thanks for watching, and we're going to see you next time.
And don't forget the usual. We got a Substack. We have a Facebook group. We have the A-Team. We have the merch. So check it all out in the links below. Because your support is what keeps us doing this every single day. We'll see you tomorrow, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Ciao for now.